In a democracy like ours, the right to protest is, of course, sacrosanct. It's very important. I've been on some myself. But does that actually give you the right to bully other people? Does it give you the right to intimidate, to strike fear into other people? Does it give you the right to shut down shops in shopping centres on private property, essentially depriving businesses of the right to operate? Really? Is that what it's all about? I'm not so sure, frankly. It's on private property. These businesses, they're employing staff. They're worried about protecting staff. What we saw either side of Christmas Day was pro-Palestine protesters outside shops like Zara, essentially forcing them to shut down for hours and hours. There's some pictures here, including on Oxford Street. And I'm just not sure that's actually part of the right to protest. But it's a really interesting topic. We're in sort of almost like uncharted territory, given the levels of division and anger about this issue. And someone who knows this topic and debates it and discusses it probably more than anybody is the director of the Free Speech Union, one Toby Young himself, who joins me down the line. Toby, thank you so much for joining me. Look, you heard my thoughts there, Toby. You're a very, very powerful advocate of free speech, of the right to protest. You understand all of the issues, and you've probably seen it and been involved in legal cases more than anybody. How comfortable are you with what we were seeing either side of Christmas? I can't recall seeing those sort of protests in private shopping centres shutting down shops. Is that acceptable, or is that actually overstepping the line?
Well, I think I should begin, Richard, by saying I would certainly defend the right to protest. I think that's a very important right in a democratic society. And one way to look at it, Richard, is imagine if Jeremy Corbyn had won the general election in 2019. The same events that unfolded on October 7th happened. And instead of supporting Israel, the British government, led by Corbyn, was now supporting Hamas and had designated the IDF a terrorist organization, a prescribed terrorist organization. I think you and I would still want to protest. We'd want to enjoy the right to protest about that on our streets and defend Israel's right to defend itself. So that's one way to look at it. If the tables were turned, even though we don't sympathize, or I certainly don't sympathize with many of the pro-Palestinian protesters, I would defend their right to protest because I would want to enjoy the same rights if the boot was on the other foot. But I do, like you, have some misgivings about how far these protests have been taken and how often the pro-Palestinians have been out there protesting, disrupting traffic, particularly in the run-up to Christmas, making it hard for people to do their Christmas shopping. And this is obviously a very important time for most retailers, a lot of hospitality businesses. This is when they make up the losses they've had to suffer over the rest of the year. So I certainly sympathise with them, and I do think they have gone a little bit too far. My solution would not be to ban any more pro-Palestinian protests, any more than I would ban Extinction Rebellion or Just Stop Oil. But I would say, look, I'll defend your right to protest, but it has to be a static protest. It has to be in a particular place, and you have to cap the numbers. So by all means, protest in Trafalgar Square, but no more than 20,000 people should be allowed to protest, and it should be time limited. And in that way, we're not interfering with their right to protest, but we're just containing it to make sure it doesn't interfere with the rights of other people to go about their day-to-day business.
And that's right, because, of course, with Just Stop Oil, we saw them essentially stop so many people from carrying out their day-to-day business, whether it's taking children to school, sick people to GPs or to hospitals, people going to work. We saw that for week after week, month after month. And really and truly, the police were sort of constantly on the back foot. That's a very interesting sort of halfway house solution that you've put there. And Toby, what is the legality about protests on private property? I mean, if I was involved in the ownership of that shopping centre, I suspect you're probably going to have that retailer, someone like Zara, they might be going to the owner and says, well, you didn't protect our premises on private property. I've suffered losses. I'm going to deduct that from the rent. So you've got to pay. I mean, what's the law in terms of protesting on private property?
Well, I think you can protest in shopping centres, which are open to the public, after all. But I think shop owners might have a case for some compensation if people actually protested inside their shops and made it impossible for them to carry on trading.
Well, essentially, that's what they did. They had to shut.
Yes, yes. And I think, like you, that's unacceptable. I mean, I think that if the British government tried to do what Javier Milei has announced in Argentina, whereby he said, as I think you said yourself, introducing this item, he's going to charge protesters for the costs of policing the protests they organise from now on. I think if a British government tried to do that, that could be successfully challenged in the Supreme Court, because I think it's probably a breach of Articles 10 and 11 of the European Convention on Human Rights. But importantly, those articles in the European Convention do allow for interfering in, restricting protest if those protests are going to result in curtailing the rights of others. Well, again, and I do think that these protests certainly have done that, and they've certainly had a very intimidating, harassing effect on other minority groups, not least Britain's Jews. So
absolutely. Let's just clarify. In Argentina, the new president, he's imposed some significant economic reforms, massive process of austerity that's created all sorts of protests, and he's saying basically those who go on the protests have got to pay for the cost of policing. Thinking of your halfway house solution there, Toby, maybe you end up with a solution where you say, well, you can protest for free for a month or so, but if you're going to protest weekend after weekend after weekend for 6 months, maybe it's a bit like a Netflix subscription. You get sort of 1 month trial for free, and then after that, you've got to start paying and coughing up, because why should the rest of us taxpayers keep on paying for the likes of Just Stop Oil, which I gather Just Stop Oil alone has cost 20 million quid?
Yeah, I like that idea, Richard. I think that, if a group want to organise a protest which is going to be seriously disruptive to ordinary people going about their day-to-day lives, then let them do that once. Let them make their point. Let them articulate their arguments in the public square, bring to the public's attention a particular issue they think is very important and they're concerned about. But if they want to do it over and over and over again, it begins to look like not just a burden on the taxpayer and an interference in other people's rights to go about their day-to-day business, but it also looks like almost a subversion of democracy. You know, if you lose the argument at the ballot box, and we often see this after election results, particularly when the Conservatives win, you see protesters out on the streets, disrupting traffic, sometimes causing other kinds of civil unrest, which seems like a very anti-democratic response to a democratic result that they just don't happen to like. Similarly, when Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion tried to disrupt the distribution of newspapers, that's an interference in the freedom of the press. Just because you don't like the way people have voted, you don't like how the democratically elected government of the United Kingdom is responding to an international crisis, you don't like what's been reported in the newspapers, that doesn't give you the right, I don't think.
It feels to me you've got to have some robust policing on this. If you leave a vacuum of policing on these protests, then actually things will spiral out of control. I mean, just to clarify, the Just Stop Oil protests are believed to have cost the police some £20 million in extra costs and overtime. The pro-Palestine protests so far and counting is a similar figure, another 20 million quid. I mean, very soon this adds up to serious taxpayers' cash at a time when actually government finances are under massive threat. And I think there does have to be a proper discussion, a proper debate about it, and a halfway house that, as you say, protects the right to protest, but also that doesn't give you the right to break the law, to bully, to ruin businesses and the like. That's a step too far.
Yeah, and I think another thing to bear in mind, Richard, is that if the police are spending all these resources on policing these protests, they're not going to be able to spend resources on protecting people from crime, from burglaries, from auto theft, from assault. It's zero sum. The police haven't got unlimited resources. They're always, in some cases, justifiably complaining about how little they've got. And if they have to spend what little they've got on policing these protests, that means much less to spend on protecting the rest of us from predatory criminals.
And in my view, that's not acceptable. Toby Young, Director of the Free Speech Union, thank you so much for joining us and sharing those thoughts there.